This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you so much for joining us. I'm Ephraim Graham. The U.S. has asked for any video or audio evidence in the investigation of the disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi. President Donald Trump also weighed in on the ongoing efforts to find out what happened to the Saudi writer and Washington Post columnist. CBN's Dale Hurd is following the case and the published reports connecting the Saudi crown prince to the suspects.
A pro-government Turkish newspaper has published a gruesome account of the alleged murder of Saudi writer Jamal Khashoggi at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, showing the writer was tortured before he was killed. The Saudi consul general reportedly is heard on tape saying, "Do this outside. You're going to get me in trouble." He was told, "Shut up if you want to live." And a New York Times report says 3 of the suspects in the alleged Saudi hit squad served as part of the Crown Prince's security team. President Trump, who earlier warned of severe punishment if the kingdom was found responsible for Khashoggi's disappearance, warned against rushing to conclusions.
Saudi Arabia has been a very important ally of ours in the Middle East. We are stopping Iran, but I want to find out what happened, where is the fault, and we will probably know that by the end of the week.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo arrived in Turkey today after holding talks with Saudi leaders in Riyadh.
In each of those meetings, I stressed the importance of them conducting a complete investigation of the disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi. And they made a commitment. They said they would do that.
Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, a longtime Saudi supporter, warned of a serious problem in the U.S.-Saudi relationship if the royal family was involved.
He had this guy murdered in a consulate in Turkey, and to expect me to ignore it, I feel used and abused. We're going to sanction the hell out of Saudi Arabia.
But some experts do not expect a serious breach in U.S.-Saudi relations, even if the royal family is held responsible. Because with Iran expanding its influence in the region, there's too much at stake.
The United States is supporting Saudi Arabia in its military efforts against Iranian-backed Houthi rebels inside Yemen. So it's a very complex picture.
That's one reason some expect Washington to try to help Saudi Arabia find a way out of the political mess it faces over the disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thanks, Dale. So just who is Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman? For some answers, we turn now to our senior international reporter, George Thomas. He's here. So, George, exactly who is this young prince?
Yeah, so Mohammed bin Salman, often referred to as MBS, is 33 years old and is widely seen as the heir to his father, King Salman bin Abdul Aziz Al Saud. MBS was appointed Saudi Arabia's crown prince back in 2017, following his father's surprising decision to make him heir apparent to the throne. Unlike many of other high-ranking members of the royal family, bin Salman did not attend university in the West. Instead, went to private schools in Riyadh and eventually got his law degree from King Saud University. He's married and has 4 children.
So is he a real reformer or simply emerging as another Middle East strongman?
Yeah, that depends. In large part, since becoming Crown Prince, bin Salman has positioned himself as the champion of modernization. He has ushered in a host of economic and social reforms. He's allowed, for example, women to drive for the first time. They can also open their own businesses. Cinemas, by the way, banned 35 years ago, are now allowed to operate. The government recently announced it will begin issuing tourist visas. And those famously morality police that used to roam the streets of the country arresting people for un-Islamic behavior, well, now they are off the streets. But experts say these changes have come with more authoritarian rule. For example, he's clamped down on critics, arresting dozens of prominent business leaders, government officials, human rights activists, and even members of the royal family. The number of executions in the kingdom has steeply increased. The crackdown is seen by many intelligence experts as a way for the young prince to consolidate his power.
Now, Saudi Arabia practices a strict form of Islam known as Wahhabism. Is there any indication that bin Salman is trying to break or to at least weaken the king's relationship with the Islamic religious establishment?
Yeah, to a large extent, these moves that he has made since becoming the crown prince, for example, allowing women to drive, opening cinemas and loosening the the sort of restrictions in the country are very, very serious. But remember, this is Saudi Arabia. It is the site of two holy establishments in Mecca and one in Medina. And Saudi Arabia today is the exporter, as you mentioned, Ephraim, the exporter of Wahhabism. It's this strict interpretation of Islam in instituting what's called Sharia law, which means anybody caught stealing gets their hand chopped off. Adulterers are stoned to death. And this relationship that the House of Saud has had with Wahhabism goes back decades. And, Ben Salman is trying to reform Islam. He is going to face a lot of pushback because of the deep entrenched sense of Islam that the religion has in Saudi Arabia.
Now, real quick, just about out of time, but the U.S.-Saudi alliance has lasted through decades of repressive treatment from the Saudis against their own people. But is it different this time in the case of Khashoggi and potential ties to the Crown Prince?
Absolutely. I mean, Saudi Arabia has had a notorious record of human rights abuses in its own country. What makes this particular situation different, Ephraim, is the gruesomeness of this attack, a reported attack, and the way it was conducted. And if it does come out to show that the House of Saud, the leadership had ties to this event, makes it all the more difficult.
All right, George Thomas, thank you so much again for your insight.
Sure.
We are learning more about a U.S. airstrike that killed as many as 75 militants. 2 drones fired missiles that destroyed an al-Shabaab training camp in central Somalia last week. Al-Shabaab is linked to al-Qaeda and claims thousands of fighters. It has carried out suicide bombings in Somalia's capital, as well as conventional attacks against Somali and African Union forces, and we're planning more. August was a banner month for jobs in the United States. Employers posted more jobs, the most jobs in 2 decades. Hiring also reached a record high, and that means many companies are desperate to find workers. Job openings rose to a little more than 7 million. That is the highest in 18 years. Strong demand for workers and fewer people out of work may force more companies to increase pay in the coming months. The economy is strong, but the national debt is on the rise, and President Trump is asking each cabinet member to trim 5% from their budgets. Meanwhile, inflation could possibly make the rising debt worse. CBN White House correspondent Ben Kennedy takes a closer look with the president's economic advisors.
The U.S. is on track for an annual deficit of $1 trillion. Major deficits like that are expected to drive the national debt from $21 to $33 trillion in a matter of 10 years. President Trump's economic advisors tell CBN News that lawmakers need to act now to avoid a crisis. The U.S. deficit soars as the economy booms. Federal borrowing continues to rise thanks to Congress passing legislation to suspend the debt ceiling. As a result, in March, the debt hit $21 trillion.
I fear that it might take another financial crisis before Congress acts, but then it might be too late.
The Heritage Foundation's Stephen Moore says D.C. is in the midst of a bipartisan spending spree.
We've seen a rocketing of our debt, especially in the last 10 years, where, Obama took the debt from 10 to 20 trillion.
If the debt payments continue to rise and rise, do you see them getting bigger than major programs like the military?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, the most important thing is in controlling the debt is to grow the economy. That's the advice that I gave to Donald Trump.
Trump's chief economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, agrees. What drastic actions are you recommending to stop the rising debt that doesn't damage the economy or cause interest rates to spike?
I don't think, by the way, there's any particular relationship between the debt and interest rates. But I want to reduce the debt burden on the economy. So, growth. You've got debt, numerator, GDP, denominator. Okay? Get that GDP up.
The gross domestic product is the value of U.S. goods and services used to examine the nation's overall economic health. Kudlow recommends growing the economy to the max so that the government brings in more money to make the interest payments on the debt.
The trick is get that ratio as low as possible. And I don't think we're in any danger zone right now, but I'd like to see it come down.
And rising interest rates can be very expensive for Washington and taxpayers. The government paid out more than $450 billion in interest payments on the national debt in each of the last 2 years. If rates rise just a half a point or so, that could add another $70 to $100 billion or more to those payments every year. And Moore points out that will add up over time.
If the interest rate goes up a quarter of a point, or let's say half a point, what kind of impact will that have on paying off the debt?
So every 1 percentage point increase in the interest rate increases the debt payments over a decade by $1 trillion. So we're talking about really large numbers.
Moore recommends one way to slow down the skyrocketing debt is to reform programs like Social Security and Medicare, plus delaying the retirement age because people are living longer.
We've known for 30 years that the Titanic is headed to the iceberg in Social Security and Medicare. We know the American people are aging. I'm a baby boomer. There's 80 million of us. You know, in the next 10 or 15 years, we're going to stop paying taxes and we're going to start collecting all these government benefits. It's not going to work.
Bottom line, this is a long-run problem that neither party is addressing. In the meantime, the government won't face any limit on borrowing until March. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, Washington.
A big victory for former Atlanta Fire Chief Kelvin Cochran and for religious liberty. The city agreed to pay Cochran $1.2 million for unjustly firing him for sharing his biblical beliefs. Cochran was terminated for handing out a devotional book that he had written to his co-workers that cited the biblical view that homosexuality is a sin. Last year, a judge ruled the city violated Cochran's First Amendment rights to free speech. Religious rights for Christians in China are getting stricter. The government is destroying crosses, churches, Bibles, and even cracking down on believers. Here to talk more about the efforts to get Bibles to China's underground church is Vernon Brewer, founder and CEO of World Help. So, Vernon, what can you tell us about the crackdown and what our fellow believers in Christ are facing there?
Well, it seems like the Chinese government is cracking down more severely than they have recently or maybe have ever. There are 100 million Christians in China. Recently, the largest house church in Beijing, the Zion Church, 1,500 believers. That church was closed by the communist government, and for failure to put in surveillance cameras, for failure to register with the government wants to have an ironclad control over the church. And 7,000 crosses have been burned and Bibles have been burned and people have lost their homes. And it's the appearance that the government is cracking down just so they can maintain control.
What is World Help doing now to get Bibles into China?
Well, everyone I talked to said the greatest need is Bibles. We've already distributed 1 million Bibles and 750,000 Bibles on thumb drives. But our partner, one of the leaders in the house church movement, said there will never be enough Bibles in China. So we are trying our best to fulfill that request.
What are your people hearing from Chinese believers?
Well, they're asking us not to forget about them. They're asking us to pray for them. Recently, 400 house church pastors have signed a petition crying out against the persecution from the government. And that's very unusual because they will be threatened with imprisonment for that. Every house church pastor I've ever met has spent at least 5 years in prison for their faith. So these are women who are paying the ultimate price, and all they ask for is for us to pray for them, pray and not forget them, and please provide Bibles for them.
Hearing them ask for prayer, how should we be praying?
Well, ironically, they said, please do not pray for the persecution to stop. It's the persecution that is bringing the blessing of God. If you can only imagine that kind of Christian commitment. So we just need to pray that they can be strong in the face of persecution and that their faith would be strong. The government's trying to get them to sign documents where they renounce their faith, and just pray that they'll be strong in the face of persecution.
We're praying for that indeed. How can people who want to do more than pray, how can they get involved?
Well, we could sure use some help in getting Bibles into the hands of these Christians. We have an elaborate network of distribution to get them where they need to go. And for every $5, we can print and distribute a Chinese Bible. So you can go to worldhelp.net and join the cause and help us provide the Word of God for persecuted Chinese Christians.
We've been seeing some video as we talk to you, and makes us wonder, have you visited with these Chinese Christians there, and what was your experience if that is the case?
Oh, I've been to China many times, 20 or 30 times. I often have to meet with them in secret and in private, and very secret, some of them. Some of them we bring them out of China to another country and train them and provide training for these house church leaders. I've been in the homes. I've sat on the beds in a home, in a house church service and worship with them many times. These are people who have so very little materially, but love God so very much.
All right, Vernon Brewer with World Help, thank you so much for your time, and God bless the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Coming up, the latest in the search and rescue efforts from the Florida Panhandle and how residents are getting some help with that recovery. And welcome back to CBN NewsWatch. The death toll from Hurricane Michael is expected to rise from the current count of 29 deaths across 4 states. Panama City Beach resident Steve Wilkerson is one survivor who witnessed Michael's devastation firsthand and expected the cleanup costs to be thousands, but he didn't have to spend 1 cent, thanks to Operation Blessing.
Like so many communities in the Panhandle, the city of Lynn Haven, Florida is dealing with a very real problem, and that is of huge trees down over driveways, on top of people's cars, and worst of all for folks, on top of their homes. And many residents do not even know where to begin. But Operation Blessing is looking to change that. 69-year-old Steve Wilkerson survived the nightmare of Hurricane Michael, but ended up with enormous pine trees on his home. He described enduring the storm.
A roaring sound outside, the wind, things flying horizontally, 4 big crashing sounds when the trees hit the house. All of us were surprisingly calm. Maybe we were just so scared it was to the max and we couldn't feel it anymore. It's just normal to be scared. But the house survived.
Steve and his family are grateful to be alive, but recovery has been a challenge.
There's no power, no water, no telephones, no internet. I bet it would be $15,000 to $20,000 to move every tree out of my yard because I had a lot of big trees.
Steve had no idea what would happen next. Operation Blessing volunteers rolled up with chainsaws and heavy moving equipment.
And when y'all drove up today, to be honest, I thought it was just another crew coming up, you know, well, $2,000 a tree, we'll remove them all. And then in comes these smiling faces with God's love in their heart and their mind. And I'm totally stunned and moved. You know, it's hard to keep from crying. And I like to think I'm a pretty tough old guy, but, you know, sometimes tears are appropriate.
Drew Anthony drove from Georgia to be a part of Operation Blessing's disaster relief volunteer force.
When you see that joy, when you see that hope, you know, someone that's gone through so much, obviously, and you're able to just be that love and that arm around their shoulders. I mean, it's there's nothing like it. You walk away with a smile on your face because you're just excited to help out.
Members of Lighthouse Church also came out to help.
We appreciate you guys for coming in and just kind of being a part of our church, because we couldn't do all this without you guys either. So it's a great partnership with everyone. Appreciate CBN and Operation Blessing. It's just an awesome network. So honestly, wasn't that familiar with them before this, but man, they're on top of it. You guys have some good people.
It's a privilege to meet you and spend time with you.
If you ever doubt God's love, survive something like this and you will see it all around you.
Coming up, a pastor's homelessness experiment. We'll see what happened and what he discovered next. A pastor dressed up as a homeless man and sat outside his church. He showed the results on Facebook and said what he witnessed blew him away. Our Mark Martin joins us now with more on this story. Mark?
Yeah, Ephraim, the post has gone viral with nearly 780,000 views so far. Now, Dr. James McDonald is the senior pastor of Harvest Bible Chapel in the Chicagoland area. He also leads the Bible ministry Walk in the Word, which people can watch and listen to on TV and radio. McDonald recently posted video of himself dressed as a homeless man with a shaggy gray beard and long gray hair, wearing a flannel jacket with holes in it. He pushed a shopping cart with belongings in it and camped outside his church. Now, he put a cup for donations next to him. Time and time again, the video shows people walking right on by. Some even go out of their way to avoid him. Scriptures appear on the video at times, including Luke 6:32-33, which reads, "And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same." And at one point in the video, you hear McDonald saying, "The closer the person is to us and the less common the struggle, the easier it is to love." And eventually you see McDonald pushing the shopping cart through the sanctuary, filled with people, to the front of the church. He walks to the pulpit, takes off his costume, and he tells the congregation about how he's camped out in front of a couple of the church's campuses to see how the church is doing when it's the hardest to love. Ephraim?
What was one of the messages that he shared with his congregation in light of what happened?
Yeah, the evidence is right there. Very interesting question. Well, he told them that their Father in heaven is giving the same graces to the people they find the hardest to love. Matthew 5:45 appeared on the screen of the video, which reads, "For he makes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous." McDonald said, if we're going to love like our Father in heaven loves, we don't get to play favorites. Ephraim?
Amen. Amen. Good word. Thank you, Mark.
You bet.
And coming up, a must-see video of a dramatic rescue. It happened at sea. Stay with us. We'll be right back with that. A dramatic water rescue caught on camera. Take a look. An elderly boater was spotted after spending the night clinging to his capsized boat in Florida's Lake Monroe. Seeing the man's fatigue and realizing he's in immediate danger of drowning, a fully uniformed sheriff's deputy leaps off the boat to rescue him, swims to that man, and reaches him just in time. The man is now recovering from his overnight ordeal, and he's going to be just fine. That will do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you right back here, same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.